Hey, I'm N.O.B.S. In my last video I talked about why most center channel speakers don't perform the way that they're supposed to. And while I still stand by everything I said in that video, I think that I missed something along the way. Jumping from basic names and functions of different speakers in a surround sound system to understanding data just seems a bit too soon. I should probably get to know you first, maybe buy you dinner, before we dive into anything too serious. So this is something that I think is very common in the audio space too. What does measuring sound actually mean? Now, if you know anything about audio, chances are you know that you can hear between 20 Hz and 20 kHz, except you probably can't. But before we get into any of that, what exactly is a Hertz? Technically speaking, Hertz refer to anything that we can measure as a wavelength. Everything from the signal that carries the radio station that you might listen to in the car to the light that's hitting your eyes right now can be described in Hertz. But that's enough geeking around. When we're talking about audio, Hertz are referred to the bass, mids, and treble that we hear, the different regions of sound. As an example, this is a standard 4-string bass guitar. The lowest note that I can play on this instrument is at 40 Hertz. That's a low E. We can play another note that's an octave higher at 80 Hertz. And another note that's an octave higher than that at 160 Hertz. So we can use these different frequencies to understand which areas have different peaks or dips, put that all together, and you can see a graph and determine if the speaker's bassy or if it has zero treble or a lot of mids. Just a note, whenever we're talking about frequencies that are over 1000 Hertz, we simply refer to those as kilohertz because it's easier to say and it means the same thing. Now that's all fine and good, but there's a few problems. First off, humans might be able to hear from 20 Hertz to 20 kilohertz, but you probably can't. See, if you're over the age of 18, you probably can't hear above 17.4 kilohertz. If you're over 40, chances are you can't hear past 15 kilohertz. And if you're over 50, chances are you probably can't hear past 12 kilohertz. Now, I don't bring any of this up to bum you out or make you think existential thoughts about your hearing. I just think when we talk about frequencies, it's important for us to understand which frequencies we can hear and which ones we probably can't. Speaking of which, if human hearing only goes down to 20 Hertz, then why on earth does any subwoofer or any pair of headphones produce frequencies lower than that? That's also a bit of a misunderstanding. See, technically we can't hear below 20 Hertz, but when those frequencies are sufficiently powerful, loud enough, then we actually start to feel them. This is why subwoofers can actually shake things around. In a car, you can actually see people's hair getting moved around and stuff rattling all over the place. Having this physical feeling in our body when we're watching a movie can really bring us into the action. Just be aware that if you're just listening to music, you're probably never gonna see anything that's below 20 Hertz, aside from a few artists out there. So now that you understand what different frequencies mean, that means that you understand what the horizontal axis on a frequency response chart means. Now we just need to understand the vertical axis to understand what it's all saying. Now, audio nerds call this amplitude, but normal people call it volume, which is perfectly fine. Volume gets a little weird too, though, and that's because we measure volume using decibels, which is a logarithmic scale. That's a fancy way of saying that it's not just a nice straight line, and small changes in decibels can result in big changes in the sounds that we hear. Now, how much this actually affects volume is a bit debated, and there's some misunderstandings about it. There are discussions about sound power versus sound pressure level versus psychoacoustic perception. For the sake of this video, we're going to say that a 10 decibel increase results in double the volume in perception of sound. What that all means in the real world is that small changes in just a few decibels can make a big difference in what you actually hear. As an example, here's what my voice sounds like when I reduce it by 3 decibels, and another example when I reduce it by 6 decibels. It's a pretty big difference. Now that you understand what some of these different measurements mean and what a frequency response graph tells us, you can also start to understand one of the biggest pieces of misdirections that audio companies tell us all the time. If you ever looked at the spec sheets of a speaker or a pair of headphones, you've probably seen that they say 20 Hertz to 20 kilohertz for the frequency response. As we've established, that's a good thing, but it's also kind of meaningless. See, talking about frequency without talking about amplitude tells us basically nothing. If you zoom out far enough on a graph, it will appear to be a pretty straight line, but even more so than that, if you talk about every part of the line that you see on that graph, you will see at least 20 hertz, if not lower, and at least 20 kilohertz, if not higher. When we're talking specifically about speakers, any measurement worth its salt should show a difference of plus or minus 5 decibels. This allows us enough resolution to see things like resonances in a speaker cabinet, standing waves, and all sorts of other anomalies that might pop up with different speakers. Basically, no speaker's perfect, and we want to be able to understand where those differences come from and how they actually impact the sound. I wouldn't necessarily say that audio organizations intentionally zoom out on graphs to make certain products look better, but I will say that they definitely shouldn't be doing that. And I'll also say thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.